first of all, please introduce yourself and tell us how you became involved in the work of rehabilitation and de-radicalization.
Yeah, hello. Thank you for the invitation, first of all. Yeah, my name is Spiros Papadopoulos. I'm first, before I came to this and working in this field, I was working in the child and youth care. And then I joined the organization Neustadt in Austria, who is the Austrian-wide operating NGO and providing social work services in the judicial context, as the probation also, the probation service within Austria. And through this I started to work with people who got judged and then quite soon I already started to be involved in and trained also in the counseling of people who have got fined and also judged because of crimes of the extremistic and radicalization context. And within Neustadt we have put a lot of focus in the mentoring and counseling of this group of people, and we have also some models from the training, and quite soon I started to pass these models. For example, there is like, just to give you an overview what I was then studying. It was a dynamics of radicalization and threat management, the impact and basic knowledge about jihadism and manifestation of Islam, and risk assessment of radicalization, radicalized persons, and then the social work practice of de-radicalization work. Yeah. So this was the focus that we are putting in within the organization, which is the base for then doing the probation service for this kind of people.
So the program is primarily a probation service, and within that you specialized to work with the target group of violent extremism. And you mentioned a few different things, the dynamic approach, the risk assessment, and the social work practices. Could I ask you to just elaborate a little bit on that? What does it mean, and what do you do?
Yeah, so within the probation service, we are focused, also the main work that we are developing, because all of us who are working in the probation service within Neustadt are social workers from their professional background. And within our work is mostly to find a good balance between analyzing the risk assessments, the risk of possibility of becoming a threat from the people, and also to develop a personal trust and a work with a positive perspective in the resources of the people. So to find a good balance within this work as a social worker. So we are trying actually quite soon, even throughout the period when the people are going to be released from prison, to get really soon in contact with them, to build up a stable working relationship, to prepare in case of rehabilitation, also to arrange the situation after the release from prison. This includes, of course, the social basic of social work, then housing, the financial situation, work and stuff. And then especially for these people also to develop different other parts. For example, develops the sustainable positive alternatives to violence, establish then to the effects of problematic behavior or oneself or others, distancing oneself from wild environment, then the stabilization of the person based on strengths and resources, what I already said, which is most of the focus of us. Then the better understanding of their own biography, of the people, what the key experience and the graduation development, why did they come to this point that they are now, that they got also fine with that. And then also then the focus of the risk assessment, and with this we have our own tool within the organization of Neustart, is the RRE. Also in German it's a Ressource and Risikoinventar, resource and risk inventar, yeah, to analyze the resources and the risk. This is a tool that we are here using in Neustart. In addition to us, we have, of course, a lot of social diagnostic tools, yeah, and then especially with these persons who are judged or the sections about the paragraph 278b. They are from the terrorist paragraph in Austria, but it includes mostly, almost only from the religious extremist group. So then also we are using the VERA-TERR as a risk assessment tool. Yeah.
Very impressive, Spiros. I have to say that as a social worker myself, this is music to my ears to listen to you explaining how you combine the kind of risk paradigm with the social diagnostic and reintegration interventions. I think this is really holistic. This is really inclusive, and I really believe in this kind of model. Based on your own experience, Spiros, what is the state of art in the field of de-radicalization and rehabilitation?
For this, I can especially, of course, talk more about Austria, how it is the situation here within us in Austria. And then, of course, a lot of the situation didn't change, but it's also, of course, an effect after the terrorist attack in Austria, yeah, in 2020. And not only within our organization, but I think within the whole country, there was a process going on after the terrorist attack. And we had a lot of, also I think we are in a good way, yeah, to develop a nationwide strategy to prevent another terrorist attack. Of course, that it's not only about us. Yeah, it's the risk is always always there. But I think it's the main thing is that what we also the one of the lessons that we learned is the multi-agency approach is really important within this work. The find frame, yeah, that we can exchange, you know, informations within the security agencies and with us, yeah, find good measures to analyze a person, to find, but also good measurements how to counsel the persons and how to provide and doing the rehabilitation work with them. With this, there was a huge project going on here in Austria, and now the case conferences is a huge part, yeah, and also legally also maintained. So since the beginning of December, we have the mandatory security case conferences for people who have a higher risk of being involved in another extremistic crime, yeah. And then the other thing is before release them from prison, there is also then should be mandatory. It doesn't matter anymore at which age the person are, to have some kind of a social net conference, yeah, to analyze the person, the social environment, the resources which may be already involved in there, and with the knowledge out of this social net conference, going into the release conference with the security agency, with the court, you know, and find which is the best way and the measures and to release the person from prison. So this was the lessons learned that we have, and this what should be also the state of art in Austria, to find a good way to treat and to deal with these persons.
Yeah. Very interesting, actually. You anticipated our next question in a way. We wanted to ask you about the learning points based on your experience. And you mentioned already multi-agency approach, case conferencing and social network conferencing, balancing both resources and risks together with the community, but also with the law enforcement and intelligence. And I think, again, this is an example of how this kind of holistic approach should work in the real life. Is there anything that you would add to this learning points?
For us, as a big question is also, because I said also, how is then the approach and how to deal with people with mental health issues, yeah, especially in this topic, because the focus is still on the either on the social work perspective, you're working within from the social work, is in case of disengagement, then in case of de-radicalization, then with organizations who are working with these religious narratives, yeah, and countering. And I think the mental health issue and topic is, within Austria, I might say, a topic which has to be put more in focus still. Yeah.
I have two questions, and I'll start with the first. Is if you could describe just a bit more method or how the work is carried out with individuals. You mentioned the social net conferencing, which I know we had presented with Iran, and there were others. So just a bit more in depth on that perspective.
For us, we as an organization get then the task from the prison, from the head of prison, to prepare a social net conference for people. Until now, it wasn't for people who were minors, yeah, or youth adults. Yeah. Now it changed, especially for this group of people. The age is open, and it should be now. Before every release, a person, also a member of Neustadt, is coordinating then the social net conference, yeah, contacting the person, yeah, asking about, first of all, if the person has, of course, given the permission and agreed to arranging this social net conference. And throughout this, we try to figure out, and also how is the network, the social network of this person, and the coordinator invites also then these persons within this conference. Then in addition to that, there are also maybe also some organizations, some NGOs involved, yeah, who are working in this field and who are in contact with the person. Or maybe be after the release. And the probation service, for example, is always taking also place. And then within this, there will a plan is going to be defined by the persons, which are the first steps after release from prison. You know, there are really quite some practical stuff with a really weekly program and about how do I arrange my daily plan. Yeah. Which are the fixed points within this week plan that I have to follow up. Yeah? And then within this group, yeah, there is also a family-only group. Yeah? If the person has, this is also then I think especially for this group of people, it's about the challenge, is there a social network or not? How is the family situated? How is the contact with the family? Mostly the family is also one of the reasons or of the problems why the person is in this situation or made this radicalization process. So we have to be really sensitive before that. So it can also be one of the outputs of this coordination and arranging the social net, that the person doesn't have any social net or the family net. So this is also one experience that we gather, and with this, then as a stability factor, as a missing stability factor, we go into the case conference who is going to lead for the release from prison. So otherwise, if there is, in the best case, yeah, there is a plan being fulfilled and arranged within this social net conference. And with this is the plan also that goes then to the judge. Yeah, and this should be one of the reasons, you know, I have to release the person and under which circumstances, and which should be then the follow-up duties that the person has to do after the release. Yeah. Working with religious narratives, we are working, of course, together with TERR-ICCM, which is in Austria, dealing especially also putting their work methods on that. And then there are also, of course, other NGOs who are working more maybe with the social network of the person, like the Beratungsstelle Extremismus, for example. They are cooperation partners as NGOs. Then there's, of course, cooperation with the prison staff, the social work and the psychological workers from the prison. And then within, I think, this group of persons, then there should also be then the security agency involved. Yeah.
Yes, Spiros, thank you very much. Very practical information, especially for our colleagues from all over Europe. I think it's very useful that you mentioned all these strategies and techniques to work with this special group. As we move closer to the end of this interview, I would like to ask you, how do you see the future of this field? How do you see the future for the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years in the field of de-radicalization and rehabilitation?
Mm-hmm. I think in general, as a national-wide, as within Austria, we're in a good way. The multi-agency approach and cooperation is quite a good base so that we can reduce the risk that another terrorist attack will come up. Yeah. Then I think and also for us, also I think really important is the exchange of knowledge. Yeah. And within, I think throughout RAN, we have here a good base to mix up, then to bring together the practitioners and the researchers. Then throughout the papers and the reports who are published, I think we can benefit all, every nation out of it to develop their own approaches and their own work in this field. I think this is quite positive in my eyes. This where if I say now within Austria, if I can talk also about, it's the terrorist threat is not only does not only come up from jihadists alone. Yeah, as I've just put it together. There is also another term of other potentials, and the danger is also, of course, of the right-wing extremism and attacks. And the focus within Austria is not so much on this field, on this spectrum, as it should be in my eyes, especially now with the corona pandemic and within the current polarization around this corona countermeasures and everything. There are a lot of radical individual persons, and then their threat is also quite high, and the focus should be also in these fields also to be put in more. So, but I think we are, with this national and international cooperation, we are in a good way to find strategies to exchange experience. And for us, I could also say that maybe to put also then the mental health more in focus will benefit a bit more, and for that the international cooperation will help us to find here also support in this.
Yes, I think it's a very good way of ending this brief interview with a positive note, noting the international and national cooperation, emphasizing the multi-agency approach and the combination of social work interventions with intelligence and law enforcement. Very, very useful advice coming from you, Spiros. And I think a lot of our colleagues will appreciate that most of these ideas can be also applicable in other contexts, not only in Austria, at least in Europe. And I think you're right. I think we need to pay more attention not only to jihadists, but also to the right wing, to the anti-vaxxers and other radicalized movements that are on the rise now in Europe. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us.